Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The injured Frazer Clarke, who was stopped by Fabio Wardley emphatically on a Riyadh season card, is vowing to fight on, saying he will not retire, that he's in the prime of his life. And in the other part of this video, we'll also cover Fabio Wardley cracking the ring ratings. So now number 9, as you can see here on screen. We'll touch on that a little bit later. So starting with Clarke, so you can see here TalkSport with the headline, "My pride is dented," that he breaks the silence on the injury, yada yada yada. So it talks about the 2 fractures that he has sustained to his cheek. Obviously they had to have some surgery and now on the mend. So he says, "Don't get me wrong, I was devastated at the time and my pride is still dented now, but the fighter in me knows that I will be back. It's going to be a difficult road, but I will work hard like I always have and aim for those heights again. I'm 33, but I'm in the prime of my life. I felt in the prime on that night, but it was just a great shot from Fabio and a leaky defense and switch off from myself. But I'm fittest now and the most athletic I've ever been in my career, so I'm not even looking for it to be over." And actually ahead of the fight, I thought in fight week he was looking trimmer and he did look in better shape than the first fight, although he weighed in 5 pounds heavier for the second fight. We'll never know what sort of impact the additional weight would have had or how he would have tracked later in that fight if it had gone that distance, but he did look, I thought, in decent shape for that fight, and certainly he was up for it, just wasn't his night. He says, continues, "If anything, it's just a blip in the road. 2 fractures to the cheekbone. The recovery is going to be between 8 and 12 weeks. And it goes on to talk about the Saudi surgeon that was woken up by Turkey Al Sheikh to perform the surgery. "They told me that surgery went exactly as they wanted it to and that it will heal stronger than before. A massive thank you to everyone in Saudi Arabia who looked after me because they were unbelievable." Okay, so he continues, "We were prepared for that fight. It was the best shape I've been in, both mentally and physically, and I didn't see anything but a win for myself. But it was a harsh reminder, especially in the heavyweight division, that if you switch off for a second, that is what can happen, and I've had to learn it the hard way. I hold my hands up. My team did a fantastic job. It was me making the mistake, and it cost me." Goes on to say he vaguely remembers congratulating Wardley after the fight. So, I mean, pretty measured statements from Frazer Clarke, not taking anything away from Fabio Wardley in the win, in fact, giving him the credit, and pleasingly not talking about any potential issues with the gloves, as we've seen Ben Shalom, his promoter, do so publicly, which has kind of put a little bit of a sour note on things, and it kind of looks like sour grapes and just a bit of bitterness by Shalom. But Clarke, I never expected him to retire from this, but you do have to ask the question, well, what next? Where does he go from here? Beyond the recovery phase, obviously, because 8 to 12 weeks, and he probably after that will take it somewhat gingerly for a little bit of time before really building into a hard camp, sparring, all that sort of stuff. Is it the best part of 8 or 9 months before we see him back in the ring? It could be. And Frazer Clarke, and this is the thing, I mean, that fight, the first fight, really told boxing fans that Frazer Clarke was a decent heavyweight. Up until that point, and I know there might be some people saying, "Oh, we knew he should be because of the Olympic pedigree," all that sort of stuff. Going from the amateurs to the pros doesn't always translate, and he'd only ever looked workmanlike in some of his fights, hadn't really entertained, but the first fight really showed us something, that he had something, but how far could he take that something? And at the moment, we still don't really know. I mean, I've been saying of the 2 fighters ahead of that fight, ahead of the first fight, I think Wardley is the guy with the more upside, where Frazer Clarke's a more sort of finished product. Wardley still getting better and improving. Clarke at 33 largely probably is going to be what he's going to be. And he's been stopped at what is domestic level, but I think you could probably say that was on par with, a European level fight to some extent. I mean, it wasn't just two domestic fighters in terms of maybe the heavyweight division. If you consider the names, you probably go, yeah, that was a fight between two maybe top 30-ish type guys at that point. I think Wardley certainly has a lot more upside and to go a lot further, in my view, and probably on the strength of that, people will have him a lot higher in their rankings for heavyweights. But Clark, it's a question mark about what he does next, because I think we probably need to see him at a similar type level, similar type fight. I mean, you could probably name a few names on the British scene that we probably could see him against, but will they think, okay, I mean, because in the past, his promoter Ben Shalom has talked about how so far above British level that Frazer Clarke is. So will they sort of pitch him in at a European level? Maybe it's a softer fight, especially for a comeback fight, and just sort of say, look, he's plotting his path to the world level. It's going to be interesting to see what they do, because if he gets mixed up at domestic level with the likes of David Adelaide or Moses Itoma, for example, and loses, or a Johnny Fisher potentially, you know, people will certainly cap their expectations for what he can do, and some of those might be dangerous fights, but they could do a bit of a European path, then get to fringe world level, and then face maybe the caliber of a Fabio Wardley type again. And as we saw with the first fight, certainly he can be in a fight. But I do think there's, you know, I don't necessarily see him as projecting as a top 10 fighter. Doesn't mean he can't be a good fighter and in good fights. But yeah, that's just where I see it at the moment. Moving on to Fabio Wardley. So wanted to just mention this. Obviously, you know, Wardley and Clark facing off. Wardley getting that dominant stoppage in the first round. He has now propelled himself to number 9 in the ring rankings, which, when you consider they have a champion followed by a number 1, 2, 3, etc., really that classes him in the ring's mind as the 10th best heavyweight. So I looked at that and I was like, that feels a little high. I was a little surprised by the inclusion, because what you're saying is that there's a number of heavyweights, you know, that are outside of that top 10. And actually, ironically, the ring, because I should say BoxRec, had Fabio Wardley at number 10, as you can see here. But there are other guys that you could make a case. There's Michael Hunter. There is Dillian White, Otto Varlin, Justice Hooney, Jared Anderson, Derek Chisora, Joe Joyce, Luis Ortiz, Andy Ruiz, Kubrat Pulev, Frank Sanchez. A number of names that you could go, well, are they on par with Fabio Wardley? Too much too soon? Or is this appropriate? I mean, they did put Jared Anderson in there, but I guess Anderson's body of work was maybe a little bit deeper, I think, than Wardley's so far. I mean, you had Charles Martin, Jerry Forrest, and a few others. I'll be interested in your take on that. But obviously, Fabio Wardley flying high, and you know, I'm really interested to see him back out again soon. Hopefully it's not too long before he's back in there. And whether they pitch him in at a sort of fringe world level fight or contesting for some sort of European belt, I guess we'll have to see. He's got the British title, has defended it. I'm pretty sure he had the Commonwealth too, didn't he? At some point, or was it just the British? Anyway, I mean, there's different routes that they can go, and Frank Warren does like to go the traditional route, typically, not do too much too soon. And I remember Fabio Wardley saying some time ago that he can't be rushed too quickly, because once you fight a certain level of fighter, you can't go back. And with his lack of experience at the amateur level, having none and just a few white-collar fights before he turned over, you know, he is still learning on the job. And this is why I think, you know, every time we see him, there are, you know, elements and improvements that he's making, that this is why I think his upside, you know, I could project him being a top 10 fighter. Maybe not a champion at this point, but we need to see more. And this is the thing, we're always constantly reassessing. But now, number 9 in the ring rankings, number 10 on BoxRec. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.